there is a certain kind of loneliness that only comes with power. Not the loneliness of sitting alone in a quiet room, or the loneliness of walking through a crowd where nobody knows your name. This is a different kind entirely. It is the loneliness of sitting at the very top of something enormous, looking down at hundreds of people who depend on you, and realizing that not one of them actually knows who you are. Not really. Not past the title. Not past the signature on their paychecks or the framed photograph on the company website. Haruto Miyazaki knew that loneliness better than he knew anything else in his life. He was 28 years old and he was already the CEO of Sweet Wave Company, one of the most successful candy and snack companies in the country. His office sat on the highest floor of a glass building that caught the morning sun like a mirror, throwing golden light across the city every single day. His desk was enormous and almost always empty, because Haruto preferred to keep things clean, organized, and under control. On the wall behind him hung a single framed quote that his late grandfather had given him when he was just a teenager stepping into a world too big for his shoes. The quote said simply, "To lead is to serve." Haruto had read those words every single morning for 5 years. And every single morning he wondered if he was actually doing either one. The report that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday. It was placed on his desk by his assistant, Ms. Okabe, a sharp and experienced woman in her 50s who had been with the company longer than Haruto had been alive. She set it down without a word, the way she always delivered bad news, quietly and without drama, because she believed that panic was a waste of perfectly good time. The report was titled, Employee Satisfaction Survey, Q3 Results, and it was bound in a blue folder that felt heavier than it should have for something made of paper. Haruto read it slowly. Then he read it again. The numbers were not catastrophic. The company was still profitable. Products were still selling. But underneath all the safe and steady business figures, something else was showing in the data. Workers were tired. Motivation was dropping floor by floor. 3 of the most experienced team members had quietly resigned in the past 2 months, and their exit interviews all said the same thing in different words. They felt invisible. They felt like the company did not see them as people. They felt like numbers in a machine that nobody was actually operating with care. Ms. Okabe stood by the window while he read. When he finally looked up, she spoke only one sentence. "If you do not understand your people, Haruto, you will lose them." She did not say it to be cruel. She said it the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, clearly, because clarity is the first step toward healing. Then she picked up her notebook and walked out, leaving Haruto alone with the report and the quiet hum of the city 40 floors below. He sat there for a long time. The afternoon moved around him. The light on the wall changed from gold to orange to the pale gray of early evening. By the time his office was mostly dark, the decision had already finished making itself inside his head. He had not planned it. He had not written a proposal or run it past a committee. He simply stood up, straightened his jacket, and thought, quietly and clearly, that the only way to understand something is to step inside it. The disguise was not glamorous. He borrowed plain clothes from a bag he kept in his office for the rare occasions when he needed to move through the building without drawing attention. A simple beige sweater. Dark trousers that did not cost more than an average week's groceries. He pushed his usually styled hair down with a little water and put on a pair of thin-framed glasses that he only ever used for reading alone at night. He looked at himself in the small mirror inside his private bathroom and barely recognized the reflection. He looked younger. He looked, for the first time in years, like someone without a title. He chose the packaging design team on floor 3. It was not a random choice. The survey data showed that floor 3 had the steepest drop in morale. It was also one of the departments he had interacted with the least, always relying on reports and third-hand summaries rather than direct conversation. If there was a place in Sweet Wave Company that needed to be understood from the inside out, floor 3 was it. He registered himself through the internal temporary staff system under the name Harumiya, listed as a short-term design assistant placed by an external agency. Ms. Okabe handled the paperwork with a kind of disapproving efficiency that meant she thought the whole plan was either brilliant or completely ridiculous, and she had not yet decided which. Monday morning, Haruto Miyazaki walked through the front doors of his own building as someone else entirely. The design floor was nothing like the top floor. Where Haruto's office was open and minimal and full of deliberate silence, floor 3 was warm and cluttered in the comfortable way that a well-used kitchen is cluttered. There were mood boards pinned to every spare wall, covered in color swatches and printed packaging samples and little hand-drawn sketches. Someone had stuck a row of small potted plants along the windowsill, and they were all slightly different sizes, like a family that had grown at different speeds. The desks were close together, pushed into little clusters, and the whole room had a particular smell of fresh paper and coffee that had been sitting just a little too long. Haruto stood in the doorway for exactly 4 seconds before he realized he had absolutely no idea where he was supposed to sit. He had run board meetings. He had negotiated contracts with companies 3 times the size of Sweetwave. He had stood in front of shareholders and spoken for an hour without a single note. And yet, standing in the doorway of a mid-sized open office on a Monday morning with nowhere to put his bag, he felt something close to genuine panic. He moved toward an empty desk near the window and set his bag down carefully. He looked around for someone to ask about procedures, about where to find supplies, about literally anything. He spotted the printer in the corner and thought, practically, that he should at least look like he had a purpose. He walked over to it. He found the panel. He pressed what seemed like a reasonable sequence of buttons. The machine made a sound like it was considering a very important question. Then it began printing. And printing. And printing. 300 pages of a completely blank document came out of that machine before Haruto managed to find the cancel button. And by then every single person on floor 3 had looked up from their work at least once. The pile of white paper sat in the tray like a small monument to his failure, and the room had gone just quiet enough for everyone to feel the awkwardness without saying so out loud. Then, from behind a towering stack of sample folders near the far cluster of desks, a voice came. "Don't feel bad. That printer ate my entire Tuesday presentation last month and then pretended nothing happened." A head appeared above the folders. Then a person followed, stepping around the edge of the desk with easy, relaxed movement, the kind that belongs to someone who has never once worried about whether a room liked them. He was shorter than Haruto by a few centimeters, with dark hair that fell a little unevenly across his forehead, wearing a soft green shirt with a small ink stain near the second button that he either had not noticed or did not care about. He was holding a strawberry-shaped eraser in one hand and a half-eaten piece of toast in the other, and he was smiling the way some people smile, easily, openly, like it cost him nothing at all. "I'm Tomoki," he said, stopping a comfortable distance away, not too close and not too far, the way someone stands when they genuinely want to make another person feel at ease. "Tomoki Fujisawa. Design Team, Packaging Division, 3 years running." He held out the hand with the eraser. Then he looked at it, switched the toast to that hand instead, and held out the other one. "Sorry? I always have too many things." Haruto shook his hand. "Haru," he said. "Haru Miya. First day. That obvious?" Tomoki looked at the pile of blank paper in the printer tray. Then he looked back at Haruto with an expression that was kind enough not to say yes directly. "The printer is weird about the double-sided setting. You have to hold the button for 3 seconds, not 2. Nobody tells you that when you start." He tilted his head toward the cluster of desks. "You can sit near us if you want. Easier to ask questions that way." He did not wait for an answer. He simply turned around and walked back to his desk, pulling out the chair beside his own and setting a spare cup of pens on the corner of it so the space looked intentional. So the space looked like it had been waiting. Haruto sat down. Over the next several hours, Tomoki introduced him to the team without making any of it feel like an introduction. It was more like Tomoki narrated the room while doing other things, sketching in the margins of a design brief, passing a stapler to Yuki across the desk, answering a question Daichi asked from across the room without even looking up. Daichi was the loud one with the enormous laugh who told jokes that were only sometimes funny and didn't seem to mind either way. Yuki sat 2 seats down and barely spoke, but when she passed her screen toward Haruto to show him the interface of the design software, her work was so detailed and so precise that Haruto understood immediately why she had been in the department for 4 years. Mr. Banda, the team leader, arrived 12 minutes late, apologized to no one in particular, made a large cup of coffee, and was asleep in his chair before 11. Tomoki caught Haruto watching Mr. Banda sleep and said, very quietly and without any meanness, "He works from home until 2 in the morning most nights because that is when he gets his best ideas. The nap is basically a medical necessity at this point." Haruto looked at the team leader slumped peacefully in his ergonomic chair and felt something shift in his chest. Not the way a CEO feels when he spots an inefficiency. Something quieter than that. Something more like understanding. By the end of the first week, Haruto had filled half a notebook. He had intended to fill it with professional observations, workflow gaps, morale indicators, process inefficiencies, things he could bring back upstairs and turn into action items and restructured budgets. But the notebook did not look like that. It had the printer's weird quirk written on page 1. It had a small note about the way Yuki always tilted her monitor slightly to the left before she started a new project, like she was opening a door. It had a line that just said, Daichi laughed so hard at his own joke he knocked over his water bottle, with no further context because none was needed. And it had, scattered through multiple pages in no particular order, small records of things Tomoki had said. Not important things. Not work things. Just things. The way he described Monday mornings as, the universe apologizing for the weekend ending. The way he said, actually, never mind, right before sharing an idea that turned out to be the best one in the room. The way he had, on Thursday afternoon, slid 2 cans of hot cocoa across the desk without saying a word, because he had noticed, somehow, that Haruto always looked cold near the window. Haruto sat in the elevator on Friday evening and opened the notebook to a page somewhere near the middle. He stared at it for a long time. Then he closed it. The elevator doors opened on the ground floor lobby, and Tomoki was standing right there with his bag over one shoulder and his coat half on, the way someone looks when they are always slightly running behind but never actually bothered by it. He looked surprised for exactly 1 second, then smiled. Oh good, I was going to text you but I don't have your number yet. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small container with a paper label on the lid written in marker. I made too many rice balls this weekend. You always skip lunch on Fridays. I noticed. Haruto took the container. He noticed. 2 words, said casually, without intention, without any awareness of what they did to the person standing across from them. Haruto could not remember the last time anyone in his life had used those 2 words about him. He had an assistant who tracked his calendar and a board that watched his quarterly performance and investors who monitored his every public statement. But none of them noticed. Not like that. Not the small things. He held the container of rice balls and said quietly, Thank you, Tomoki. Tomoki waved a hand and walked out into the evening, coat still half on, already looking at something on his phone, entirely unaware of the small and significant thing he had just done. Haruto stood in the lobby of his own building, holding a container of homemade rice balls, wearing glasses he did not need and a name that was not his, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt seen. And that, more than anything, was what frightened him. Nobody tells you that falling for someone happens in the smallest moments. Not in grand gestures or perfect movie scenes where the lighting is just right and someone says exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. It happens in the in-between spaces. In the Tuesday afternoon when someone slides a cup of warm tea to your side of the desk without being asked. In the Wednesday morning when they remember, without any reminder, that you do not like your documents stacked on the left side because you are left-handed and it slows you down. In the quiet Friday evenings when the rest of the office has already emptied out and there are only 2 people left under the fluorescent light, and neither of them is in any particular hurry to leave, and neither of them says anything about that out loud. Haruto had been on floor 3 for exactly 2 weeks and 3 days when he understood that his carefully organized research notebook had become something else entirely. He did not admit this immediately. He was a precise and logical person by nature, someone who had been trained from a young age to look at situations clearly, to identify what was happening and name it correctly and then decide what to do about it. He applied this same approach to the strange new warmth that had taken up residence somewhere behind his ribs. He examined it from different angles. He gave it practical explanations. He told himself it was gratitude, because Tomoki had been kind to him when he was new and uncertain. He told himself it was respect, because Tomoki was genuinely talented and hardworking in ways the company reports had never managed to capture. He told himself many things, standing in front of his executive bathroom mirror on the top floor each morning before putting on his glasses and becoming Haru again. The mirror did not argue with him. But it also did not look particularly convinced. The sticky notes started on a Wednesday. Haruto arrived at his desk on floor 3 to find a small yellow square stuck to the corner of his monitor. The handwriting was round and slightly uneven, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who writes fast because their thoughts move faster than their pen. It said, in letters that leaned a little to the right as though they were walking somewhere, today's forecast is cloudy with a high chance of vending machine coffee. Bring coins. You always forget coins. Haruto read it twice. Then he carefully peeled it off the monitor, folded it once along the middle, and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. The next morning there was another one. This one said, "You did well in the brief review yesterday. You asked the question everyone else was too nervous to ask. Don't stop doing that." The morning after that, "I made extra onigiri. They are in the small blue container in the break room fridge. The one with the green lid. Do not let Daichi find them first." Each note was small. Each one took maybe 30 seconds to write. And each one sat in Haruto's jacket pocket, folded neatly, growing into a collection that he would never in his life have been able to explain to anyone on the 40th floor of this building without deeply embarrassing himself. He started writing back. This was not planned. One morning, Tomoki arrived slightly late because the train had been delayed, and his desk was empty and cold, looking in the way that desks look when the person who belongs to them is not there yet. Haruto looked at it for longer than made sense. Then he picked up a pen, found a green sticky note from the supply drawer, and wrote something short and plain. He stuck it to the corner of Tomoki's monitor and went back to his own desk and stared at his screen for 10 minutes without reading a single word on it. When Tomoki arrived, shaking rain off his jacket and apologizing to the room in general, he sat down, saw the note, and went very still for a moment. Then the smile came, slower than his usual ones, quieter, the kind that starts somewhere internal before it reaches the face. He did not say anything to Haruto directly. He simply reached out, peeled the note off carefully, and put it in the front pocket of his work bag. Daichi noticed. Daichi noticed everything and said most of it out loud immediately. He pointed between the two of them with a highlighter marker and opened his mouth. Yuki, without looking up from her screen, reached over and put one hand over Daichi's face and pushed gently. Daichi closed his mouth. Nobody acknowledged any of this. The project that brought them together properly was the anniversary campaign. Sweet Wave Company was turning 10 years old in 2 months, and the packaging design team had been assigned the limited edition product line that would mark the occasion. It was the biggest brief the team had received all year, and it arrived on a Thursday in a thick envelope that Mr. Banda opened during his one alert hour of the morning, read aloud with great ceremony, and then passed to Tomoki with the calm confidence of someone delegating to the most capable person in the room. Tomoki looked at the brief. Then he looked at the timeline. Then he made an expression that was not quite worry but was the thing that lives next door to worry. He spread the materials across 2 desks that evening after the others had gone home, lining up the brand guidelines and the product specifications and the historical packaging samples going all the way back to the company's first year. He had his sketchbook open and 3 different colored pens arranged by how often he expected to use them. He was so absorbed in it that he did not hear Haruto come back until a chair scraped the floor beside him. "You do not have to stay," Tomoki said, not looking up. "I know," Haruto said. He picked up the brief and started reading. They worked like that for the first hour, mostly in silence, the kind of silence that is full rather than empty. Tomoki sketched and crossed out and sketched again. Haruto read through the brand history, pulling out details and dates that might be useful, organizing the timeline into a shape that could inform the design direction. Somewhere around 9 in the evening, Tomoki looked over at what Haruto had assembled and stopped drawing entirely. "How did you do that so fast?" he said. It was not really a question. "I like finding the structure inside things," Haruto said. "Once you see the structure, the rest gets easier." Tomoki looked at him for a moment with an expression that Haruto had learned to recognize over 2 weeks of sitting beside him. It was the expression Tomoki made when something surprised him in a way he had not prepared for. Then he turned back to his sketchbook and said quietly, "I want to hear how you think about things. Tell me more." And Haruto did. He talked about the early years of the company, about how the original packaging had been simple and warm and personal before the rebrand 5 years ago made everything sleeker and more modern. He talked about how the anniversary was a chance to bring both things together, the warmth of the beginning and the confidence of where the company stood now. He talked without notes, without slides, without the careful measured language he used in boardrooms, and Tomoki listened with his pen resting still in his hand and his sketchbook forgotten. And when Haruto stopped talking, Tomoki sat quietly for a moment and then picked up his pen and drew something completely different from anything he had sketched in the previous hour. It was better. Significantly better. And they both knew it. They ordered delivery food from the place 2 streets over because the vending machine options ran out of anything edible past 8. They ate at the cluttered desk with the brief spread around them like a map, and they talked the way people talk when the professional distance between them has quietly folded itself up and put itself away somewhere neither of them consciously decided. Tomoki told Haruto about growing up in a small apartment with his mother and younger sister, about how he had discovered design through a free after-school program, about how winning a company scholarship had felt like the first time the world had opened a door specifically for him rather than in spite of him. Haruto listened carefully and said little, because there are some stories that deserve to be held rather than responded to immediately. When Tomoki asked about him, he answered honestly about the things that were true regardless of his name or his title. He talked about growing up under pressure he had not chosen, about how quiet success felt from the inside compared to how it looked from the outside, about how he had spent so many years building something that he had forgotten to notice whether he was happy inside it. Tomoki was quiet for a moment after that. "That sounds very lonely," he said. Not with pity. Not with the careful diplomatic sympathy that people in Haruto's actual life offered when they sensed something heavy behind his composure. Just plainly, honestly the way Tomoki said most things. "It is," Haruto said. And that was the most truthful thing he had said to anyone in a very long time. The moment between them after that was warm and still and a little fragile, the way moments are when two people have just shown each other something real. Tomoki picked up his pen again. Haruto looked back at the timeline. Neither of them said anything more about it, because sometimes understanding does not need a response. Sometimes it just needs to be received. It was during the third late evening of working together that Director Sato walked through floor 3. He was taking a shortcut through the building after an overrunning executive dinner, moving quickly with his coat still on, not expecting anyone to be there at that hour. He rounded the corner into the design area, saw the two figures at the far desk, and his eyes landed on Haruto with the instant recognition of a man who had sat in board meetings with him for 3 years. His mouth opened. Haruto was across the floor in 4 steps. He caught Director Sato by the elbow with a grip that was polite but communicated very clearly that this was not a moment for loud reactions, and he guided him with smooth, quiet urgency into the supply room beside the main corridor. He pulled the door almost shut behind them. The shelves of copy paper and label rolls pressed in around them from both sides. Director Sato stared at him. He took in the plain sweater, the glasses, the name badge that said Harumiya, and his expression moved through several different phases before settling on something caught between amusement and bewilderment. "Miyazaki," he said, keeping his voice low because the situation clearly required it even if he did not fully understand why yet. "What is happening right now?" "Research," Haruto said. Director Sato looked at him steadily. "Employee engagement research," Haruto added. Director Sato glanced back toward the closed door. Through the narrow gap, they could both see the warm light of the design floor and hear the faint sound of Tomoki humming something absent-mindedly while he worked. "Research," Director Sato repeated slowly. "Please do not say anything to anyone. I will explain everything properly next week." A long pause settled between them among the copy paper and the label rolls. Then Director Sato smiled. It was a small smile, private and knowing, the kind that belongs to someone who has just understood something that the other person has not yet admitted to themselves. "Of course," he said. "Research." He straightened his coat, stepped out of the supply room and continued down the corridor without looking back. Haruto stood among the shelves for an extra 3 seconds, reorganizing his expression, and then walked back to the desk where Tomoki was still humming, still sketching, still entirely unaware that anything had happened. Tomoki looked up when Haruto sat down. "Everything okay? You were gone a while." "Copy paper," Haruto said. Tomoki nodded and looked back at his sketch. "We are almost out of the blue kind by the East printer, by the way. Someone should tell facilities." Haruto looked at him. At the ink stain that had migrated to a third shirt this week. At the small stack of sticky notes already prepared for tomorrow morning, corners lined up neatly, waiting to be written on. At the way he held his pen slightly too tight when he was concentrating on something he cared about. "I will add it to the list," Haruto said quietly. He opened his notebook. He wrote down copy paper by the East printer. Then, below it, in smaller writing that he would not analyze until much later that night in the silence of his real office on the 40th floor, he wrote one more line. It simply said, "I cannot keep doing this." He was not entirely sure which part he meant. Some secrets do not explode. They dissolve. Slowly, quietly, the way sugar disappears into warm water without any drama, without any sound, until the moment you taste it and realize the whole thing has changed completely and there is no going back to what it was before. Haruto had been carrying his secret the way you carry something you know is too heavy for one person but refuse to put down because putting it down means explaining why you were holding it in the first place. Every morning he put on the plain sweater and the unnecessary glasses and walked into a floor of the building that technically belonged to him, and every evening he walked back out carrying a little more of something he could not name and a little less certainty that what he was doing was still research. The anniversary project presentation was scheduled for a Friday. The whole team had poured themselves into it across 3 weeks of late evenings and early mornings, and the work showed in the way good work always shows, not loudly, not with announcements, but in the quiet confidence of people who know they have made something worth seeing. Tomoki had designed a packaging concept that pulled the warmth of Sweetwave's original years forward into the present, using color and texture and small hand-drawn details that made the product feel both familiar and new at the same time. He had incorporated Haruto's structural thinking into every layer of it without crediting him directly, because Tomoki was the kind of person who absorbed good ideas and made them better and then handed them back to the world without keeping score. Haruto sat in the presentation room on floor 3 and watched Tomoki explain the concept to Mr. Banda and 2 visiting department heads, and he felt something move through him that was complicated and layered and would have taken him a long time to fully describe. Pride was part of it. Admiration was part of it. But underneath both of those things was something quieter and more uncomfortable, the growing awareness that the person standing at the front of that small conference room talking about color palettes and emotional design language was someone Haruto had come to know in a way that had nothing to do with any report or survey or business objective he had walked through those elevator doors to accomplish. The presentation went well. Better than well. The visiting department heads asked questions with the focused energy of people who are genuinely interested rather than just professionally polite. And when it was over, Mr. Banda woke up from what may or may not have been a light doze and said, with complete sincerity, that it was the best work the team had ever produced. Daichi cheered loud enough that someone from floor 4 sent a confused message asking if everything was all right. Yuki allowed herself a small precise smile that meant more coming from her than a standing ovation from anyone else. Tomoki caught Haruto's eye across the room and held it for just a moment. And what passed between them in that moment was the particular language of 2 people who have built something together and both know it. That evening the team celebrated in the small way that close-knit groups celebrate, without planning and without budget, just a cake that Daichi had bought from the bakery on the ground floor with his own money, and music playing from someone's phone at a volume that was technically against building policy but which nobody was going to enforce on a Friday. Haruto stood near the window with a paper plate and watched the people around him and thought about the report in the blue folder that had started all of this. The report that said workers felt invisible. Looking at this room right now, at Daichi refilling everyone's cups before they were empty and Yuki carefully saving a corner piece of the cake for Mr. Banda who had stepped out to take a call, he understood something that no survey could have shown him. These people did not feel invisible to each other. They had built their own visibility, their own warmth, in the spaces the company had not thought to look. He had not built that. He had not created those friendships or that loyalty or that particular way the team moved around each other like they already knew where everyone was going to be. They had done that themselves quietly without recognition or reward. And he, the person whose name was on the building registration, had known almost nothing about it until 3 weeks ago. Tomoki appeared beside him at the window with 2 small cups of the sparkling juice Yuki had found in the break room fridge. "You look like you are thinking very hard about something," Tomoki said, handing him a cup. "I do that sometimes," Haruto said. "I know." Tomoki looked out at the city through the glass. The evening had turned the sky a deep blue that was almost purple at the edges, and the building lights below were beginning to come on one by one. "Can I tell you something?" Haruto looked at him. "When you first came to floor 3, I thought you were going to be one of those people who stays for 2 weeks and then disappears without saying goodbye." Tomoki turned his cup slowly in both hands. "We have had a few of those. Short-term people who pass through and do not really land anywhere. And I thought you were going to be like that." "What changed your mind?" Haruto asked. Tomoki was quiet for a moment. "You stayed for the copy machine paper," he said. "The 300 blank pages. Most people would have walked away from that and hoped everyone forgot. You stood there and sorted every single sheet back into the tray in the right order. You were embarrassed but you did not run." He glanced sideways at Haruto. "I think that is when I thought, okay, this one is going to actually be here." Haruto held his cup and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would not immediately become something too large for a Friday evening with cake and music playing in the background. "I am glad you stayed, Haru," Tomoki said simply. And that was when Haruto understood, fully and finally and without any remaining room for alternative explanations, that the thing he had been calling by other names for 3 weeks had only one actual name. He looked at Tomoki standing beside him in the purple-blue evening light with a paper cup of sparkling juice, completely unaware of the size of the thing he had just said, and he thought, with the clarity that comes at the end of a long and necessary self-deception, "I have to tell him the truth." He opened his mouth. Daichi appeared between them like a small natural disaster, arms out, expression catastrophic. The cake had been placed too close to the edge of the table and had expressed its disagreement with this arrangement by sliding off the plate entirely. The room dissolved into laughter and someone grabbed napkins and the moment folded itself up and was gone. Haruto stood with his paper cup and his unmade confession and looked at the ceiling briefly. Not tonight. But soon. Monday arrived the way Mondays do when you are carrying something heavy, faster than you were ready for and brighter than felt reasonable. Haruto was in an early board call that ran long, and by the time it finished he was already moving through his building toward the elevator on autopilot, still half inside the professional language of the call, and he did not realize until the elevator opened on floor 3 that he was wearing his actual clothes. His real clothes. His CEO clothes, the well-fitted dark jacket and the pressed shirt and the deliberate, composed appearance of someone who runs things. No plain sweater. No reading glasses. Hair the way it actually looked when he was not flattening it with water in a hurry. He stepped out of the elevator before his brain caught up with the situation. He was 3 steps into floor 3 before he saw Tomoki. Tomoki was standing at the far end of the room with a folder in his hand, and he looked up at the sound of the elevator, the way everyone on an open floor looks up automatically, and his eyes landed on Haruto, and for one long still second, his expression did the quiet and devastating thing that faces do when they are processing something they were not prepared to process. The folder stayed in his hand. His mouth did not open. His eyes moved from Haruto's face to the jacket to the absence of glasses to the hair, and Haruto watched him put it together piece by piece the way you watch someone solve a puzzle that you placed in front of them yourself. Except this was not a puzzle and neither of them had chosen the moment. Haruto did not move. Tomoki set the folder down on the nearest desk with a careful, controlled movement. Then he walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and when the doors opened he stepped inside without a word. He did not look back. The doors closed. The floor was very quiet. Haruto was in the lobby in under 2 minutes. Tomoki was standing near the front doors with his bag already on his shoulder, and Haruto understood that the bag meant he had gone back to his desk and picked it up before coming down, which meant the elevator ride had been a collection of thoughts rather than a departure made without thinking. He was not running. He was hurting, which was much harder to stand across from. "Tomoki," Haruto said. Tomoki turned. His face was arranged carefully in the expression of someone who has decided to be composed, which is a very different thing from actually being composed. "How long?" he said. Not loudly. Not with anger in the sharp way anger usually announces itself. Just quietly, the way questions are asked when the person asking them is not sure they are ready for the answer. "From the beginning," Haruto said. He did not dress it up. Tomoki deserved the plain version of the truth after weeks of a decorated version of everything else. The silence between them was the kind that has weight. "I read a report," Haruto continued. "It said people here felt invisible. I wanted to understand why. I thought if I came down and observed from the inside I would see things clearly." "And did you?" Tomoki said. Still quiet. Still controlled. "Yes," Haruto said. "I saw everything clearly. I saw how hard your team works. I saw what you do for people without being asked. I saw the sticky notes and the extra rice balls and the way you explained the copy machine to a grown man who printed 300 blank pages and made him feel like it was a completely normal thing to do." He paused. "I saw you, Tomoki. Clearly. Everything I said to you about myself was true. All of it. The loneliness. The pressure. The feeling of being at the top of something and not knowing if any of it means what you hoped it would mean. None of that was performance." Tomoki looked at the floor between them. His jaw was set in the way people set their jaw when they are deciding something. "I shared things with you," he said. "About my mother. About the scholarship. About being afraid the budget cuts were going to take the team apart." He looked up. "I shared those things with Haru. Not with the CEO." "I know," Haruto said. And I am sorry. Not for hearing them. I am sorry for not being honest about who was listening. Another silence. Longer this time. I need some days, Tomoki said finally. Take whatever you need, Haruto said immediately, and meant it fully and without any calculation behind it, which was perhaps the most honest thing he had said in the entire conversation. Tomoki nodded once, short and careful, and walked out through the front doors into the morning. Haruto stood in his lobby and did not move for a long time. Upstairs in his real office that afternoon, he did something he had not done in months. He sat at his desk and did not open a single report or take a single call or respond to a single message. He took the sticky notes out of his jacket pocket, all of them, unfolded them one by one, and laid them across the enormous empty surface of his executive desk. They looked very small against all that space. Small and specific and real in a way that almost nothing on that desk had ever been before. He picked up a pen. He found a single yellow sticky note in his desk drawer, left over from some forgotten practical purpose. He wrote on it for a long time, crossing things out, starting again, simplifying, until what remained was plain enough to be true and short enough not to hide behind length. When Tomoki returned 3 days later, he found it on his desk. It said, in handwriting that was careful and slightly uneven because Haruto had written it slowly and meant every word, I came to floor 3 to understand my company. I stayed because of you. I'm sorry I was a coward. Haruto. The real one. Tomoki sat down. He read it once. He read it again. He read it a third time, and on the third reading his carefully arranged composure came apart slightly at the edges in the way composure does when something reaches the part of a person that composure was never actually designed to protect. He looked up. Haruto was standing in the doorway of floor 3 in his CEO clothes, completely out of place, holding 2 cans of hot cocoa, looking like a man who had made a decision and was standing inside it fully for the first time. The whole floor had gone still. Daichi's mouth was open. Yuki had turned completely around in her chair. Haruto walked across the floor to Tomoki's desk and set one of the cans down on the corner, next to the place where the sticky notes always went in the morning. He did not make a speech. He did not explain himself a second time. He simply said, in a voice that was quiet enough to be only for Tomoki, I was wondering if the offer to teach me to draw a better cat still stands. The silence stretched one more second. Then Tomoki reached into his desk drawer and took out a pen and a fresh piece of paper and set it on the desk between them. Sit down, Haruto, he said. And Haruto sat. In a chair on floor 3, in a room full of mood boards and mismatched plants and a printer with a 3-second button, at a desk covered in small yellow squares of paper, beside a person who had offered him half a sandwich on his first day and somehow, without any plan or permission, had offered him something much larger than that in every day that followed. He picked up the pen. He drew a cat. It had 3 legs and a square head and 1 ear significantly larger than the other. Tomoki looked at it for a long moment. Then he laughed. Fully, warmly, the way he laughed at things that were genuinely funny to him, with his whole face involved and no apology for the volume. Haruto looked at him and felt the loneliness that had lived at the top of his building for 5 years quietly, finally begin to leave. If this story reminded you that the most important things in any room are never found in reports or titles or corner offices, share it with someone who needs to hear that today. And if you are waiting to be seen by the right person, keep going. Sometimes they are sitting right beside you, already saving you the good rice balls, already writing your name on a yellow sticky note, already making space at their desk before you even know you need it.